All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the first part of our review, where we're going to look at the 1920s and the Great Depression. So, just some easy objectives and standards to analyze the importance of topics discussed in the class and review the topics discussed in class. And you've seen these standards as well before too, so just take a look at them. All right, so just think about this. What questions do you still have about these topics, the 1920s and the Great Depression? Anything you're confused on? Anything you may have struggled with? Think about that. And then again, our essential question is just what do you remember about these topics, okay? All right, so remember back to like the beginning of November, end of October, we talked about post-World War I America. So after World War I, life changed for Americans. Unemployment was high. Uh, Women lost the jobs they had that they had been placed in World War I. Veterans faced a lot of personal difficulties, like struggling with memories from the war, or physical or mental disabilities. And we also had a fear of immigrants and communism, because communism had come to the Soviet Russia, to what would now become the Soviet Union, and a lot of Americans are afraid of foreign influence coming to America. So again, going off of the fear of immigrants and communism, it was widespread throughout the country. Remember, we had A. Mitchell Palmer, who had Palmer raids, who sought to find, excuse me, suspected anarchists or people who wanted to overthrow the government. But he wasn't very successful at this, and a lot of innocent people were arrested, deported back to their countries, or discriminated against. We also had a very famous court trial known as the Sacco and Vanzetti trial. Remember, they were two Italian immigrants who had been anarchists or supported anarchy, and were accused of robbing and killing someone, and without they weren't really given the chance of a fair trial, and the jury found them guilty, and they were sentenced to jail and eventually executed. And again, it's still a case that is very debated in American history today, whether or not these two men were given a fair trial, whether or not they were guilty or not. But because of the prejudice of the time, they were unfortunately found guilty without a really fair trial and executed. We have two Republican presidents during the 1920s, or during the beginning of the 1920s at least. Warren Harding faced very difficult times with his cabinet and his scandals. You remember talking about the teapot, dome scandal, and a lot of his cabinet members were taking bribes and just doing a lot of things that government officials should not be doing. Um, and he struggled with that as president, and personally too. A lot of these people were friends he trusted, and they kind of did things illegally behind his back without his knowledge, or what he said he didn't know about. Sadly, Harding did die suddenly, and his vice president, Calvin Coolidge, then became president. Now, Coolidge was a very quiet man, but he had a lot of success with businesses and prosperity. He is going to help spread this economic prosperity of the 1920s. So, as businesses began to grow, we had a lot of automobile industry succeeding. We had the airplane industry began to succeed, and this led to an increase in travel and transportation. People began to travel across the country in their new automobiles. People began to take vacations across the country in new automobiles. And cities and little towns are going to begin to pop up all over the country as these roads expand. So new cities and new little, destinations are going to pop up. Consumers also bought new technologies. We have things like the refrigerator and the vacuum, and all those types of the radio. And speaking of the radio, people are going to listen to the radio for entertainment and news, and sports, and people are also going to go to sporting events to watch baseball and things like that, and wrestling matches. And people are also going to do other crazy leisure activities like flagpole sitting, which I believe I showed you a video of, and dance marathons where they would, people were told to dance pretty much until they dropped, and some people did die from it, from exhaustion. But there were dance competitions like that as well. So people in the 1920s are living very big, very fun, very lavish, just different lifestyles in the 1920s. So while Americans are buying these new technologies and enjoying these big, wonderful lifestyles, many Americans could not afford it on their own. So they had to put things on credit to, they would pay a little bit and then they'd have to pay off the rest later, just like today with credit cards and things like that. But a lot of people could not afford to pay it back. So this is going to eventually lead to problems with the economy. So people also invested in the stock market, where they bought, stocks of companies as the 1920s continued to expand and grow. And two of the ways they did this was through speculation and buying on margin, which eventually is going to cause the stock market to decline and collapse. And when the stock market does decline and collapse, banks are going to close, people are beginning to panic, and this is going to lead to the beginning of what we know as the Great Depression. Just a side note, we also talked about this as well as the Dust Bowl. So poor farming techniques also are going to create problems for the Midwest, along with the Great Depression in the United States. So this was an environmental disaster, and what it was just dust storms, just dirt and mud and sand and all that stuff just floating around the air. And it did cause a lot of damage to farm and property, and it also made a lot of people sick and took some lives. Now, life during the Great Depression was tough for all Americans. People were unemployed and struggled to find jobs, and families were broken. Men left their families, their wives, and their children to try and find jobs, or because they just didn't feel like they were men anymore because they couldn't provide for them. Women were forced to try and find jobs. Children were forced to find jobs. Some children ran away from home to, try and find other, success somewhere else. And just life was overall tough for everybody, rich, poor, white Americans, African Americans, whatever the case may be. It was just a very tough time for our country. Americans are going to begin to look for help from the government because they, can't do it on their own. So in our next review, or what you kind of remember hopefully already, is we have the New Deal and FDR coming up as well, which is going to provide help to the American people as well. So just to wrap up, again, this is just a very quick review. If you are, we are going to go over a lot of these topics again in class. So if you have any questions, you can bring them then, or message me or Mr. Moriarty about this, and we will definitely help you. But we'll be going over these things again in live class. But I would also recommend that you go back and look at the lessons if you have any questions, and look in the previous week's folder and make sure that you definitely understand a more in-depth version of these topics as well, so you know how you want to go about addressing these topics in your projects, okay? Anyway, so the 1920s were a time of struggle for people because, remember, we dealt with a lot of fears of communism and immigration, but it was also a time of great satisfaction for people. People were making more money, they were, enjoying their lives, they were having fun. It was kind of like a big party for most Americans. And then we have the Great Depression, which is the opposite of a big party for most Americans. And I didn't mean to chuckle there, but it was a big role reversal for a lot of Americans who had enjoyed the 1920s. No jobs, no money, just overall, like I said, very tough times for a lot of Americans. And we're going to see how the government is going to try to resolve those issues in the next review. Okay? So again, make sure you have a good understanding of these topics. Come to live class with questions, or send us a message if you want to. But other than that, we'll see and talk to you later.